A mafia boss's dying wish was to see his lost wife. And then a miracle happened. Everyone thinks he's the most feared man in the city, but tonight he learns he has only weeks to live. With his empire falling apart, he makes one final request: find the woman who vanished 10 years ago without a trace. But when his men finally bring her back, something is wrong. She's terrified, hiding a little boy who looks just like him. And before he can even speak to her, a bullet tears through the window because someone in his own family wants her dead and wants the truth buried forever. As the world closes in and enemies start hunting the woman he never stopped loving, he realizes this isn't just a reunion. It's a race against death, betrayal, and a secret that could destroy everything he built. If the clock is ticking and everyone wants them dead, will seeing her again save his life or end it? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The stark white walls of the medical suite seemed to close in around Matteo Moretti as the oncologist's words echoed in his mind. 6 weeks. The diagnosis hung in the air like a death sentence, which, he supposed with grim humor, it quite literally was. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti," the doctor said, his voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered bad news daily. "The organ failure is progressing rapidly. We can try to make you comfortable, but..." Matteo raised one hand, silencing him. He didn't need platitudes or false hope. "Thank you for your time, doctor." His voice remained steady, betraying none of the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior. Rising from the leather chair, with fluid grace that belied his condition, Matteo straightened his tailored suit jacket. The movement was automatic, ingrained from years of maintaining an image of absolute control. 2 armed guards fell into step behind him as he exited the private clinic, their presence a reminder of the empire he'd built, an empire that would soon need a new king. The drive back to his Brooklyn penthouse office passed in silence. Matteo watched the city blur past his bulletproof windows, his mind already shifting from his diagnosis to more pressing matters. He'd built his organization from the ground up, transforming it from a small street operation into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that controlled half of New York's underground. 6 weeks wasn't much time to ensure its survival. The elevator ride to the top floor of his building was swift and silent. His security detail remained outside as he entered his office, a sprawling space of marble and mahogany with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Brooklyn skyline. Here, in this sanctuary of power, Matteo allowed himself a moment of weakness. He moved to his desk, his fingers finding the silver frame he kept in the top drawer. The wedding photo inside captured a moment frozen in time. Himself, 10 years younger, actually smiling as he looked down at his bride. Zoe's face glowed with happiness, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders, her hand resting on his chest as if she could touch his heart directly. "Where did you go?" he whispered, his thumb tracing the outline of her face. The question that had haunted him for a decade still burned. She'd vanished without a trace, leaving him with nothing but theories and an emptiness that no amount of power could fill. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Enter," he commanded, his voice instantly returning to its usual steel. Dante stepped in, his most trusted soldier, moving with the careful precision of someone bearing significant news. "Boss, there's something you need to see." Matteo watched as Dante approached, noting the slight tension in his enforcer's shoulders. Whatever this was, it was important enough to make even the stoic Dante uneasy. "Our surveillance team picked this up yesterday," Dante said, placing a photograph on the desk. Small market town on the coast about 3 hours north. The image was slightly grainy, but clear enough. Matteo's heart seemed to stop, then thunder back to life with painful force. There she was. Zoe, his Zoe, standing among market stalls, filled with fresh produce. Her hair was shorter now, lighter, but he would know her anywhere. But it was the man beside her that made Matteo's blood turn to ice. Marco Rossi, the man whose execution Matteo had ordered personally 10 years ago, after discovering his involvement in a plot against the family, the man whose body he'd watched being disposed of in the harbor. "Impossible," Matteo breathed. But the evidence was right there in front of him. His mind raced, connecting dots he'd never seen before. Had Marco's death been faked? Had he helped Zoe disappear? The implications were staggering. "When was this taken?" he demanded, his fingers pressing into the glossy surface of the photograph. "Yesterday morning," Dante replied. "We can have a team ready within the hour." Matteo stood, moving to the window as the sun began its descent over the city. The skyline was bathed in amber light, buildings gleaming like gold bars stacked against the darkening sky. His empire spread out before him, all the power and wealth he'd accumulated over the years. And none of it meant anything compared to what he'd lost. 6 weeks to live. The diagnosis that had seemed like a death knell now felt like a deadline, a final chance to right the wrongs of the past decade. He wouldn't die without answers. He wouldn't leave this world without seeing her face again, without understanding why she'd left, without making sure she was safe. "Bring her to me," he ordered, his voice low and intense. "Whatever it takes, whatever resources you need, find her and bring her here." He turned to face Dante, his dark eyes burning with purpose. "But she's not to be harmed. Anyone who touches her will answer to me personally." Dante nodded once, understanding the gravity of the command. "And Rossi?" A muscle twitched in Matteo's jaw. "If he's truly alive, I want to know how and why. But Zoe is the priority. Everything else can wait." As Dante left to make the arrangements, Matteo returned his attention to the city before him. The sun had nearly disappeared now, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and blues. Somewhere out there, the woman he'd never stopped loving was living another life, perhaps believing herself free of the world she'd fled. "Zoe," he whispered her name like a prayer, like a summons, like a promise. The ghost of their past wouldn't slip away again. Not when time was so precious. Not when there were so many questions left unanswered. His phone buzzed with updates as Dante mobilized their resources. Teams were already being dispatched, surveillance feeds analyzed, travel routes mapped. The familiar machinery of power grinding into motion, all focused on one objective: bringing Zoe home. Matteo touched the wedding ring he still wore, the metal warm against his skin. 6 weeks. It wasn't much time to untangle 10 years of mysteries, to understand the betrayals that had torn them apart, to possibly rebuild what was broken. But it would have to be enough. He hadn't built his empire by accepting defeat, and he wouldn't start now. Not with this. Not with her. The city lights began to twinkle to life as darkness settled over Brooklyn. Each one seemed to mock him with possibilities of where she might be, what she might be doing, who she might have become in the years they'd been apart. The photograph on his desk seemed to pulse with importance, a beacon pointing the way to answers he'd thought forever lost. In his mind, he could still feel her hand on his chest from their wedding day, still see the trust and love in her eyes before it all fell apart. Whatever had driven her away, whatever truths lay buried in the past, he would uncover them all. His remaining time would be dedicated to this one purpose, this final mission to reclaim what was stolen from him. The night spread its dark wings over the city, and Matteo Moretti, the man who controlled an empire, but couldn't hold on to the one person who mattered most, prepared himself for what might be his last war. Not against rival families or threatening alliances, but against time itself, against the secrets that had torn his life apart, against the failure that had haunted him for 10 years. 6 weeks to live, 6 weeks to find her, 6 weeks to understand why she ran, why Marco Rossi was alive, why everything he thought he knew might be wrong. 6 weeks to make peace with a past that refused to stay buried. His phone buzzed again. Dante, confirming the first teams were already on the move. Matteo's fingers traced the outline of Zoe's face in the market photograph one last time, before he slipped it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart where she had always belonged. The city stretched endlessly before him, a maze of lights and shadows, secrets and possibilities. Somewhere in that vast expanse, Zoe was out there, living, breathing, existing in a world parallel to his own, not for much longer. Whether she came willingly or not, whether the truth was what he hoped or what he feared, he would see her again. This time he wouldn't let her disappear into the night like smoke. This time he would get answers. This time with death already marking its calendar for him. He had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The coastal night wrapped around Dante's black SUV like silk as he watched the quiet streets through tinted windows. 2 hours from Brooklyn's chaos, the sleepy town felt frozen in time. White picket fences, weathered beach cottages, and salt-scented air that carried none of the city's urgency. "Target location confirmed," murmured one of his men, voice low in the earpiece. Single-story rental home, 117 Ocean View Drive. Dante's team had worked through the night, methodically tracking the photograph's origin. The marketplace where Zoe had been spotted led them here, to this peaceful corner of the world, where waves whispered secrets to the shore. 3 unmarked vehicles now held strategic positions around the neighborhood, waiting. Inside her modest rental home, Zoe stirred as dawn's first light filtered through gauzy curtains. Her internal clock, honed by years of vigilance, rarely let her sleep past sunrise. The house creaked gently as she padded to the kitchen, bare feet silent on worn wooden floors. She moved with practiced efficiency, pulling out ingredients for breakfast. The routine was comforting, eggs cracking against the bowl's edge, bread sliding into the toaster, coffee beginning its morning percussion of drips. These quiet moments were precious before Luca woke and their day began in earnest. As if summoned by the thought, soft footsteps approached the kitchen. "Mom?" Zoe turned, her heart catching as it did every morning at the sight of her son. At 9 years old, Luca was already showing signs of the man he would become. Dark eyes that missed nothing, the same quiet intensity she remembered in Matteo. "Good morning, sweetheart," she smiled, pushing the thought away. "Hungry?" Luca nodded, climbing onto a kitchen stool. He watched her cook with the same focused attention he gave everything, hands folded neatly on the counter. "Can we go to the beach later?" "We'll see," Zoe answered, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "How about you start with breakfast?" Movement caught her eye through the kitchen window, a dark sedan rolling past, slower than normal neighborhood traffic. Her spine stiffened, instincts firing warning signals. Keeping her voice steady, she turned to rinse dishes in the sink, using the reflection in the window to track the vehicle. Another car appeared minutes later, different model but similar, deliberate pace. Ice slid down her spine as years of careful patterns screamed danger. "Luca," she said carefully. "Remember the game we practiced? The one about packing quickly?" Her son's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. They'd rehearsed this, though she'd prayed they'd never need it. "The blue backpack?" "That's right." Very calmly, "Go get it ready, just like we practiced." As Luca slipped from his stool, Zoe forced herself to move naturally toward the bedroom. Her own emergency bag was already packed, hidden in the closet. Years of running had taught her to stay prepared, to never fully unpack. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled out the bag, checking its contents: cash, documents, burner phones. Through the bedroom window, she spotted more vehicles. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they were already surrounded. "Mom?" Luca's voice was steady, but she heard the thread of fear underneath. "It's okay, baby." She pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. "We're just being careful, remember?" A sound from the backyard made her freeze. Footsteps on grass, too deliberate to be a neighbor. Zoe pushed Luca gently behind her, backing toward the house's side door. But as she turned the corner, a familiar figure stood blocking their escape. Dante hadn't changed much in 10 years, still solid as stone, face impassive, eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. He held his hands clear of his weapons, a deliberate show of peace. "Mrs. Moretti," he said quietly. "That's not my name anymore." Zoe's arm tightened around Luca, mind racing through options that were rapidly disappearing. It was never legally changed. Dante's gaze flickered to Luca, recognition and confirmation passing through his eyes. "We're not here to hurt you. The boss wants to see you." Fear and something else, something she refused to name, twisted in her chest. "Why now? After all this time?" "He's dying." The words fell between them like stones. 6 weeks, maybe less. He wants to see you before—" Dante stopped, recalibrated. "He needs to see you." The world tilted sideways as Zoe processed this. Matteo, dying. The man had always seemed indestructible, a force of nature more than a mortal being. She looked down at Luca, seeing his father's features, reflected back at her, and knew she was out of choices. "We'll need a few minutes to pack properly," she said finally. Dante nodded. 5 minutes. My men are covering all exits. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Zoe led Luca back inside, helping him pack clothes and his favorite books. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced. Dying. 6 weeks. The truth she'd buried for 10 years would finally surface, whether she was ready or not. "Where are we going?" Luca asked as she zipped his bag. "To the city," she answered carefully. "To meet someone important, someone who's been looking for us for a long time." "Is it my father?" The question stopped her cold. They'd never discussed it directly, but Luca was too smart not to have wondered, too observant not to have noticed the gaps in his own story. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him close. "Yes, it is." The black SUV waited in front of the house, engine purring quietly. Dante held the door open as Zoe helped Luca inside, then slid in beside him. As they pulled away from the curb, she watched her peaceful life of the past few years shrink in the rearview mirror. Luca leaned against her, warm and solid, a reminder of everything she'd fought to protect. She wrapped her arm around him, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo, trying to steady her racing heart. The coastal town fell away behind them as they merged onto the highway, heading toward the city. Toward Matteo, toward the past she'd fled and the future she'd feared. 6 weeks suddenly seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. Inside her chest, a war raged between terror and an emotion she couldn't name, not after all this time. The miles rolled by under the SUV's wheels as the sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the morning mist but leaving the fog in Zoe's mind intact. Luca dozed against her shoulder, peaceful despite the upheaval. She envied his ability to trust, to accept change without being crushed by the weight of history and consequence. Her fingers combed gently through his dark hair. Matteo's hair, Matteo's eyes, Matteo's quiet strength already showing in their son's bearing. The city skyline appeared on the horizon, a jagged promise or threat, depending on how you looked at it. Zoe held Luca closer, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. 10 years of running, of looking over her shoulder, of protecting their son from dangers he didn't even know existed. All of it culminating in this moment, this return, this inevitable confrontation with the truth. The SUV moved steadily toward Brooklyn, toward the man she'd never stopped loving, even as she fled from his world, toward answers and consequences too long delayed. 6 weeks to unravel a decade of secrets. 6 weeks to face what she'd done, what she'd hidden, what she'd lost and saved and sacrificed. 6 weeks to find out if love could survive betrayal, if truth could heal old wounds, if the past could be forgiven before time ran out completely. The black SUV wound its way up the long driveway of the Moretti estate as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Zoe's breath caught in her throat at the sight of the familiar mansion, a fortress of limestone and iron that had once been her home. Now it loomed before her like something from a half-forgotten dream. Armed guards lined the curved driveway, their dark suits and earpieces, a reminder of the power concentrated within these walls. Security cameras tracked their vehicle's progress, their small red lights blinking steadily. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. "Mama," Luca whispered, pressing closer to her side. "Are we really staying here?" Before she could answer, the SUV rolled to a stop at the base of the grand entrance steps. Zoe's heart stuttered as a familiar figure emerged from the massive wooden doors. Matteo. He moved more slowly than she remembered, but his presence still commanded attention, still made the air feel charged with electricity. His suit was impeccably tailored, masking the weight loss she could detect in his face. But his eyes, those dark eyes that had always seen straight through her, remained unchanged, intense and penetrating. Dante opened the car door, and Zoe found herself frozen, unable to move. 10 years of running, of looking over her shoulder, and now here she was, back where it had all begun, back where it had all fallen apart. "Zoe!" His voice was rougher than she remembered, but it still sent shivers down her spine. "Come inside." She forced herself to move, keeping Luca partially hidden behind her as they exited the vehicle. But Matteo's sharp eyes missed nothing. He stiffened, his gaze fixed on the small figure trying to disappear into her shadow. For a long moment, no one moved. The evening air grew thick with tension. "This way," Matteo said finally, turning toward the house without another word. His controlled movements couldn't quite hide the slight tremor in his hands, the way he seemed to measure each step. The illness Dante had mentioned was clearly taking its toll, though Matteo fought to conceal it. They followed him through the grand foyer, past priceless artwork and gleaming marble floors. Luca's eyes widened at the opulence, but he remained silent, sensing the gravity of the situation. Zoe kept her hand firmly on his shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. The library doors opened at Matteo's approach. The room beyond was exactly as she remembered. Walls of leather-bound books, deep leather chairs, the massive mahogany desk that had been the center of so many important decisions. So many arguments, so many secrets. "Sit," Matteo commanded, lowering himself into one of the chairs with careful precision. When they were settled, he fixed Zoe with an unblinking stare. 10 years, Zoe. 10 years of silence. I want answers." "Not now," she said firmly, glancing meaningfully at Luca. "Not until he's settled somewhere safe." "Safe?" A bitter smile curved Matteo's lips. "You're in my house, under my protection? Where could be safer?" "Please," Zoe insisted, meeting his gaze steadily. "He needs rest. We both do." After that, I'll tell you everything you want to know." Mateo's jaw clenched, but after a long moment, he nodded. "Antonio will show you to your rooms. They're adjoining with a connecting door. Guards will be posted in the hallway. For our protection?" Zoe couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "Or to keep us from running?" "Both." Mateo's honesty was brutal, unchanged by time. His gaze drifted to Luca again, something flickering in his eyes before he looked away. "Antonio!" A guard stepped forward from the shadows near the door, gesturing for them to follow. Zoe stood, guiding Luca toward the exit, but Mateo's voice stopped her. "Zoe!" She turned, finding him watching them with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Don't try to leave. Not again." The threat was clear beneath the words, but there was something else too, a desperation she'd never heard from him before. The diagnosis Dante had mentioned hung heavy in the air between them. Their rooms were on the 3rd floor, in the secure family wing. The space was luxurious but impersonal. Cream walls, plush carpeting, elegant furniture that had never been touched. Zoe helped Luca unpack his few belongings, trying to make the strange space feel less intimidating. "Are we prisoners?" Luca asked quietly as she tucked him into the king-sized bed that dwarfed his small frame. "No, sweetheart." She smoothed his dark hair back from his forehead, so like his father's. "We're guests. It's complicated, but I promise I'll explain everything soon." "Is he really my father?" Luca's perception startled her, though it shouldn't have. He'd always been unusually observant, another trait inherited from Mateo. "Yes," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Try to sleep now. We'll talk more tomorrow." She sat beside him, humming softly until his breathing evened out in sleep. Only then did she notice the shadow in the doorway. Mateo stood there watching them with an expression she couldn't read. His eyes moved from Luca's sleeping form to her face, questions burning in their depths. The resemblance was undeniable now, with them both in the same room. The same strong features, the same quiet intensity, the same way of watching the world with careful consideration. Zoe could see the moment Mateo began to accept what was right in front of him, though he said nothing. She rose carefully, not wanting to wake Luca. Mateo stepped back as she approached the door, allowing her to pass without touching him. The distance between them felt both vast and microscopic, loaded with 10 years of unspoken words and buried truths. "Tomorrow," she said softly, pausing in the doorway of her own room. "I'll tell you everything tomorrow." Mateo nodded once, his expression unreadable in the dim hallway lighting. He turned and walked away, his steps measured and controlled, despite the slight unevenness she could detect. The guard at the end of the hall straightened as he passed. Zoe closed her door quietly, leaning against it as the events of the day crashed over her. From their peaceful breakfast to this gilded cage, their world had turned upside down in the span of hours. She could feel the weight of the coming conversation pressing down on her. The explanations she'd have to give, the secrets she'd have to reveal. Through the connecting door, she could hear Luca's soft breathing. She focused on the sound, letting it anchor her as memories and fears swirled through her mind. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own revelations. For now, she could only wait, trapped once again in the house she'd fled, facing the man she'd never stopped loving, protecting the son who connected them forever. Outside her window, security lights illuminated the manicured gardens and guards patrolled the perimeter with practiced precision. The Moretti fortress was as secure as ever, keeping dangers out and secrets in, just as it always had. Zoe moved away from the door, preparing for a night of uncertain sleep, knowing that dawn would bring the reckoning she'd spent 10 years trying to avoid. The sunrise crept through the curtains, finding Zoe already awake in her gilded cage. Sleep had been elusive, memories and worries chasing each other through her mind like restless shadows. She'd spent hours listening to Luca's peaceful breathing through the connecting door, drawing strength from his presence. When she finally emerged from her room, dressed in yesterday's clothes, Mateo was waiting. He stood by the window at the end of the hall, his broad shoulders tense beneath his perfectly tailored suit. The morning light was cruel, highlighting the pallor of his skin and the shadows beneath his eyes, yet even illness couldn't dim the raw power that radiated from him. "You look tired," he said, his voice rough. "So do you." Zoe wrapped her arms around herself, maintaining distance between them. "Where's Antonio?" "I dismissed the guards for now. This conversation needs to be private." The emptiness of the hallway suddenly felt overwhelming. Zoe glanced at her door, thinking of Luca still sleeping inside. "He's safe," Mateo assured her, reading her concern. "The entire floor is secured. No one gets up here without my permission." Like before? The words slipped out before she could stop them, sharp with old pain. Mateo's jaw tightened. "Tell me why you left." It wasn't a request this time. The desperation in his voice was impossible to miss, though he tried to hide it behind his usual commanding tone. 10 years, Zoe. 10 years without a word, letting me think you were dead. Then I find out you're alive with our—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "With my son. I didn't have a choice." Zoe's voice trembled. "Someone wanted me dead." "Who?" The single word carried enough menace to make her shiver. "Someone in your family, someone close." She wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "I found out I was pregnant, and 2 days later, I overheard a phone call about having me taken care of. They said I was a liability, that a baby would make you weak." Mateo went completely still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. "Who?" he demanded again. "I never saw them directly. But the man in that photograph you found, he worked for your family back then. He warned me, showed me proof that the hit was real. He helped me disappear." "I had him executed." Mateo's voice was ice. "He betrayed us, stole money." "He was framed." Zoe stepped closer, unable to stop herself. "By the same person who wanted me dead. He saved my life, Mateo. Saved Luca's life before he was even born." Understanding dawned in Mateo's eyes, followed by a fury so intense it transformed his face. "Someone in my family." His hands clenched into fists. "Someone I trusted. I couldn't tell you then. I didn't know how deep the betrayal went, who else might be involved. The only way to protect our baby was to run." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I knew what this life was like, what happened to children born into it. I'd seen too many funerals, too many grieving mothers. I couldn't—" The explosion cut her off, so powerful it shook the entire building. Zoe stumbled, and Mateo caught her automatically, pulling her against his chest. His heart thundered beneath her cheek as debris rained down from the ceiling. "Luca!" She tried to pull away, but Mateo's arms were steel bands around her. The door to their son's room burst open, and Luca appeared, eyes wide with fear. "Mom! Here!" She reached for him with one hand, Mateo still holding her with the other. Luca ran to them just as Antonio and 3 other guards charged up the stairs, weapons drawn. "South perimeter breach," Antonio reported tersely. "Vehicle explosion at the gate. Multiple hostiles attempting entry." "They found us," Zoe whispered, horror closing her throat. "They know we're here." Mateo's grip tightened on both of them. "Get them to the panic room," he ordered Antonio. "No one approaches without my direct confirmation. Shoot anyone who tries." "You can't fight them," Zoe protested, grabbing his arm as he tried to step away. "You're sick. I'm not dead yet." His eyes blazed with lethal promise. "And no one touches my family, not while I'm breathing." Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Gunfire erupted outside. Luca pressed closer to Zoe, trembling but silent. Mateo looked down at him, their son, who had his eyes and his strength, and something shifted in his expression. "Go with Antonio," he told them, his voice brooking no argument. "I'll handle this." He bent and pressed his lips to Zoe's forehead, then gently touched Luca's hair. "No one will hurt you again. I swear it." Antonio moved forward with 2 guards, forming a protective circle around Zoe and Luca. The 3rd guard stayed with Mateo, who was already pulling out his phone, barking orders as they hurried down the hall. The panic room was 3 floors down, accessed through a hidden elevator that only operated with Mateo's direct authorization. As they descended, Zoe held Luca close, feeling his heart race against her side. She could hear more gunfire above them, shouts and running feet. "Mom," Luca whispered, "are they here because of us?" "Yes," she answered honestly. There was no point lying now. "But your father won't let them hurt us." "I know." His voice was small but certain. "I saw his face when he looked at us. He's like the dragons in my books. Scary to enemies, but protective of their family." Despite everything, Zoe felt her lips curve slightly. Trust a child to make such a simple, perfect comparison. She looked at Antonio, who was watching the elevator's descent with sharp focus. "How many men does Mateo have here?" 25 on property, another 30 within 10 minutes response time. His expression was grim. But this attack, it's coordinated. They knew exactly when to strike. The implications chilled her. Someone had been watching, waiting for this moment. Someone who knew Mateo was vulnerable, who knew Zoe and Luca had arrived. Someone on the inside. The elevator doors opened into a reinforced concrete corridor. Antonio led them to a heavy steel door, entering a complex sequence into the keypad. Inside, the panic room was surprisingly comfortable, more like a small apartment than a bunker. Monitors on one wall showed security feeds from around the property. Zoe guided Luca to a couch, trying to block his view of the screens, but he was already watching, his eyes tracking the movements of men in tactical gear as they engaged with Mateo's security forces. "That's my father," he said suddenly, pointing to one feed. Mateo was visible in his office, giving orders to a group of armed men. Even through the grainy footage, his authority was unmistakable. "He's not running away." "No," Zoe said softly. "He never runs." She watched the screens with her heart in her throat, seeing the battle unfold across the estate grounds. Mateo's men were well-trained, methodically pushing back the attackers. But the invading force was large and determined, and they seemed to know the property's layout too well for comfort. The truth she'd carried for 10 years felt like it was burning in her chest. Someone in Mateo's family, someone he trusted, had ordered her death. Now they were trying again, but this time they weren't just after her. They wanted Luca too, the heir that could cement Mateo's power, the child that could ensure his legacy lived on. Through the monitors, she watched Mateo directing his defense, showing no sign of the illness that was killing him. He moved with deadly purpose, every gesture containing the controlled violence that had first drawn her to him, that had made her both fear and love him. "We'll be safe here," Antonio assured them, though his hand never left his weapon. "This room can withstand anything they might try." Zoe nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on Mateo's image. She had run once to protect their child. Now she was back, and the danger had followed. But this time was different. This time, they would face it together. On the screen, Mateo turned toward one of the cameras, as if he could sense her watching. His expression was pure predator, promising retribution to anyone who dared threaten what was his. The years apart, the illness, the betrayal, none of it had diminished the core of who he was, a man who would burn the world to protect what he loved. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the estate as cleanup crews worked to repair the damage from the morning's attack. Inside, Mateo's security teams swept every inch of the property, their movements precise and controlled. The tension hung thick in the air, a reminder that safety was an illusion easily shattered. "Move them to my wing," Mateo ordered, his voice leaving no room for discussion. He stood in his office, one hand pressed against the window as he watched his men patrol the grounds below. "I want them where I can protect them personally." Dante nodded, already reaching for his radio to relay the instructions. Within minutes, staff were relocating Zoe and Luca's belongings to the suite adjacent to Mateo's private rooms. The wing was the most secure area of the estate, accessible only through heavily guarded checkpoints and protected by state-of-the-art security systems. Zoe watched the transfer with mixed emotions, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Being this close to Mateo would make it harder to maintain the careful distance she'd tried to keep since their arrival. Every time she saw him, her heart did that familiar skip and stumble that 10 years hadn't managed to cure. "Mom, look at this room!" Luca's excited voice drew her attention. He was bouncing on the massive bed in what would be his new bedroom, his earlier fear seemingly forgotten. "It's bigger than our whole house." "Careful, sweetheart," she cautioned, but couldn't help smiling at his enthusiasm. The room was indeed impressive, decorated in rich blues and silvers that somehow perfectly suited her son's tastes. "I took the liberty of having some age-appropriate entertainment brought in." Mateo's deep voice came from the doorway, making Zoe jump. He stood there looking deceptively casual, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Books, games, a gaming console if you'd like it, Luca." Luca's eyes widened. "Really? Mom never let me have one before." "Perhaps your mother had good reasons," Mateo replied diplomatically. But Zoe caught the quick flash of pain in his eyes. Every revelation of Luca's life without him seemed to hit like a physical blow. The day progressed in a strange dance of avoidance and inevitable encounters. Meals were served in Mateo's private dining room, forcing them into intimate proximity 3 times a day. Zoe found herself hyper-aware of every movement, every breath, every accidental brush of hands when reaching for the salt. During lunch, she watched as Mateo carefully cut Luca's meat into manageable pieces, the tenderness of the gesture at odds with his dangerous reputation. Luca chatted easily, seemingly comfortable with the man he didn't yet know was his father. The boy had always been perceptive about people, and something in him clearly recognized Mateo as safe, despite his intimidating presence. "Tell me about school," Mateo said to Luca, his voice gentler than Zoe had ever heard it. "What subjects do you enjoy?" Math and science, Luca answered enthusiastically. Mom says I'm good with numbers, just like… He stopped abruptly, glancing at Zoe with sudden uncertainty. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Mateo's hand tightened on his fork, his knuckles white with strain. He looked between Luca and Zoe, and she could see the wheels turning, the pieces falling into place. Throughout the afternoon, Zoe caught Mateo studying Luca with increasing intensity. He noticed the way the boy's brow furrowed in concentration while reading, identical to his own. The careful way Luca organized his new belongings, showing the same methodical nature. The slight tilt of his head when considering a question, a mirror image of Mateo's own mannerism. By evening, the air between them was electric with tension. Zoe put Luca to bed, reading him a story until his breathing evened out in sleep. She stayed longer than necessary, dreading the confrontation she knew was coming. When she finally stepped into her own room, Mateo was waiting. He stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the night sky. Without turning, he spoke, his voice raw with emotion. "Is he mine?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 10 years of secrets and pain. Zoe's hands trembled as she closed the door. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's yours." Mateo's shoulders stiffened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a long moment he didn't move. When he finally turned to face her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. 10 years, he said hoarsely. 10 years of his life, of watching him grow, of teaching him to walk, to read, to become who he is, all stolen from me. "I had to protect him," Zoe pleaded. "Someone in your family wanted us dead. What choice did I have?" "You could have trusted me!" The words burst from him, anguished and angry. "I would have moved heaven and earth to keep you both safe. Instead, I lost everything, my wife, my son, my chance to be a father." He turned away again, his breathing harsh in the quiet room. Zoe could see the tremendous effort it took for him to control his emotions, to keep his voice from carrying to where Luca slept. "I watch him now," Mateo said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see myself in every gesture, every expression. How could I not have known the moment I saw him?" "Because the possibility was too painful to consider," Zoe answered softly. "Just like it was too painful for me to stay, knowing that every day could be the day they succeeded in killing us." The silence stretched between them, filled with regret and loss and love that had never truly died. Finally, Mateo moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "Get some rest, he said, his voice rough. "Tomorrow we begin finding out who did this to us, who turned me into a stranger to my own son." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Zoe found herself sitting at the breakfast table with Mateo and Luca, watching as their son devoured a plate of pancakes. The moment felt surreal. The family breakfast she had dreamed of for years, twisted by circumstances into something both precious and painful. Mateo sat at the head of the table, his coffee untouched as he watched Luca with hungry eyes, drinking in every detail of his son's features and mannerisms. His face was a careful mask, but Zoe could see the storm of emotions behind it. "These are really good," Luca said, mouth full of pancake. "Better than Mom's." "Luca," Zoe admonished automatically, but Mateo's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "I'll teach you the recipe," he offered quietly. It was my mother's. The moment was interrupted by Dante's arrival with the morning security report. Mateo's expression hardened as he read it, his jaw clenching with barely contained rage. "I swear to you both," he said, looking first at Luca, then meeting Zoe's eyes with fierce intensity. "I will find who did this. They will pay for every moment they stole from us. Every birthday, every Christmas, every single day I didn't know I had a son. They will pay for all of it." The morning sun streamed through the estate's windows, casting long shadows across marble floors. Zoe paced the hallways with Luca at her side, hyper-aware of Mateo's gaze following them whenever they passed his study. She tried to focus on keeping their routine as normal as possible, helping Luca with his reading and mathematics, but her nerves remained on edge. "Mom, can we explore more?" Luca asked, his dark eyes bright with curiosity. He shared his father's inability to sit still for long, another trait Zoe couldn't help but notice. "We need to stay in the safe areas, sweetheart," she reminded him gently, running her fingers through his hair, so like Mateo's. The estate was massive, but their permitted zones were carefully restricted. From her position, near the study's open door, she could hear fragments of Mateo's meeting with his men. Dante's steady voice carried through the gap, discussing security protocols and surveillance patterns. The words, breach points, and insider access made her stomach clench. The shooter had detailed knowledge of our rotations, Dante was saying. They knew exactly when to strike during the shift change. Mateo's response was too low to hear, but the controlled fury in his tone was unmistakable. Zoe guided Luca away from the study, but not before catching a glimpse of surveillance footage playing on multiple screens, men in tactical gear approaching the estate's perimeter with military precision. As morning stretched into afternoon, the confines of the house began to feel suffocating. Luca's restlessness grew more apparent, and Zoe found herself longing for fresh air. The estate's gardens, visible from the main parlor windows, beckoned with their manicured lawns and high-security walls. "Please," she asked one of the guards. "Just 15 minutes outside. Luca needs to move." After checking with Dante, the guard agreed, but insisted on a full security detail. They stepped into the garden, Luca immediately racing toward a stone fountain that centered the space. Zoe watched him trace the water's edge with his finger, his face lit with simple joy. The crack came without warning, sharp and deadly, splitting the air like thunder. Zoe's heart stopped as she saw stone chips explode from the fountain mere inches from where she stood. Before she could process what was happening, a solid mass slammed into her from behind. Mateo's body covered hers completely, pressing her into the ground as more shots rang out. His breathing was labored, but his grip remained iron strong, one arm extended to pull Luca down beside them. Guards swarmed the garden, weapons drawn, radioing positions and coordinates with rapid-fire precision. "Stay down," Mateo ordered, his voice rough against her ear. His weight should have crushed her, but instead, she felt oddly safe, protected by the solid wall of him. She could feel his heart hammering against her back, his muscles coiled tight with tension. Luca trembled beside them, and Zoe reached for his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "It's okay, baby. We're okay." Minutes stretched like hours until Dante's voice cut through the chaos. "Area secured. Shooter neutralized." Only then did Mateo's grip loosen, though he kept one hand pressed to Zoe's back as they rose. His face was ashen, the brief burst of protective energy clearly taking its toll. But his eyes blazed as he scanned the garden, then the surrounding rooftops where his men were already collecting evidence. "Get them inside," he barked to Dante. "Full lockdown. No one enters or leaves without my direct approval." His hand slid to Zoe's lower back, guiding her and Luca toward the house with urgent purpose. Inside, Mateo didn't stop at their assigned rooms. Instead, he led them up to the third floor to a set of heavy wooden doors she recognized as the entrance to his private suite. The space beyond was elegant but clearly lived in. Papers scattered across a desk, a half-empty coffee cup on a side table, family photos she recognized from their marriage, displayed alongside newer ones. "You'll stay here now," he said, brooking no argument. "Both of you. This level has the highest security, and my presence deters most threats." He moved to a door on the left, revealing a bedroom with 2 beds. "Luca can sleep here, connected to the main suite. You'll take my room, I'll use the sofa." "Mateo, you're ill. You need proper rest." Zoe started to protest, but he cut her off with a sharp look. "What I need is to know you're both safe." His voice softened as he looked at Luca, who was exploring the room with cautious interest. "I've lost enough time with my son. I won't lose either of you again." The intensity of his protection shook her. Even after 10 years, even facing his own mortality, his first instinct was still to shield her, to place himself between her and danger. The realization made her throat tight with emotion. Dante appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "Boss, we need to review the security footage. The shooter's approach suggests detailed knowledge of our blind spots." Mateo nodded, but his attention remained fixed on Zoe and Luca. "Stay here, rest. Try to calm him down." He gestured to their son, who was putting on a brave face, but couldn't quite hide his nervousness. "I'll have food sent up, and guards will be posted at every access point." As he turned to leave, Zoe caught his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving us out there." His eyes softened for a moment, and his hand covered hers briefly before he pulled away. "Always," he replied simply, then followed Dante from the room. Zoe spent the next hour helping Luca settle into the new space, unpacking their few belongings and trying to establish some sense of normalcy. She could hear Mateo's voice from the next room, discussing security measures and investigation details with his men. The sound was oddly comforting, a constant reminder of his protective presence. When evening fell, she tucked Luca into one of the beds, sitting beside him until his breathing evened out in sleep. Only then did she allow herself to really look at Mateo's private space, the sanctuary he'd created for himself in her absence. The suite spoke of power and wealth, but also loneliness. A single glass by the decanter of whiskey, a reading chair positioned to view the city lights, books stacked on one side of a massive bed. She ran her fingers along the spines, recognizing some titles from their shared past. Her heart ached, thinking of him here alone all these years, while she and Luca built their quiet life by the coast. The sniper's attack had proved her old fears weren't paranoid fantasies. The danger was real, immediate, and escalating. But watching Matteo throw himself between her and harm's way, despite his illness, made her question whether running had truly been the only option. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Matteo entered, looking exhausted but determined. "Security is tripled," he said quietly, mindful of Luca sleeping nearby. "No one gets within a mile of this house without us knowing." Zoe nodded, suddenly very aware of being alone with him in his personal space. The air seemed to thicken with unspoken words and memories. "You should take the bed," she insisted. "You need proper rest to keep your strength up." "I'm fine on the sofa." He moved to a cabinet, pulling out extra blankets. "Besides, I'll be up most of the night, coordinating with our investigators. Sleep. You're safe here." The way he said it, like a promise, like a vow, made her shiver. Even now, even with everything between them, she believed him completely. In this moment, in this space, no harm would reach her or their son. Matteo would die before he let that happen. The thought of his mortality, so recently revealed, struck her anew. She watched him arrange the blankets on the sofa, his movements slightly stiff, betraying his hidden weakness. Yet he'd still thrown himself over her without hesitation, still stood as her shield against the world. The first night in Matteo's suite settled into an uneasy rhythm. Zoe lay rigid in his massive bed, hyper-aware of his presence on the chaise lounge barely 10 feet away. The silk sheets whispered against her skin, carrying the faint scent of his cologne. Every few hours, she heard him shift and stifle a groan. His breathing labored in the darkness. Around 3 a.m, he jolted awake with a sharp intake of breath. Zoe's eyes snapped open, catching the silvery outline of him sitting up, head bowed as he pressed a hand to his side. The moonlight through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast stark shadows across his face, highlighting the pain he couldn't fully mask. "Do you need anything?" she whispered, breaking their pretense of sleep. "No." His voice was rough. "Go back to sleep, Zoe." But sleep proved elusive for both of them. She listened to him pace quietly, his footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. When dawn finally crept over the city skyline, neither had managed more than fragments of rest. Luca woke early, his small feet padding across the floor. Instead of coming to her as usual, he approached Matteo's chaise. Zoe watched through half-closed eyes as their son studied the man who'd thrown himself between them and danger just yesterday. "Are you sick?" Luca asked softly, climbing onto the chaise before either adult could stop him. Matteo stiffened, clearly unsure how to handle this direct approach. But when Luca settled against his chest, small hands patting his face with curious concern, something in Matteo's expression cracked open. He wrapped careful arms around the boy, cradling him close. "Yes," he answered simply. "But I'm still strong enough to protect you and your mama." Zoe's throat tightened as she watched them together. Luca had inherited Matteo's intuitive nature, his ability to read people in situations. Now he was using that gift to offer comfort to a father he barely knew, and Matteo was accepting it with naked vulnerability. The morning passed in domestic quiet, with guards delivering breakfast and fresh clothes. Around noon, Matteo dismissed the staff and security from the suite entirely, leaving just the 3 of them in his private sanctuary. He looked worse than yesterday, shadows under his eyes deeper, movements more careful, but his gaze was clear and determined as he faced Zoe. "You deserve the whole truth," he said, settling into his reading chair while she perched on the edge of the bed. Luca played quietly nearby with some toys Dante had brought up, occasionally glancing between his parents with solemn attention. "The uncle who raised me after my parents died," Matteo began, his voice low and controlled. "He wasn't the savior everyone believed. He was—" He paused, choosing his words carefully with Luca in earshot. "He taught me survival meant being feared. When I was 16, he ordered me to handle a traitor. Personally, publicly. It was my first—" Another careful pause. "My first time ending someone. He made sure everyone knew about it, spread the story until my reputation was sealed. The killer prince, groomed to inherit through blood." Zoe's hands clenched in her lap, remembering the cold, dangerous man she'd first met, and how that facade had cracked when they fell in love, revealing the wounded soul beneath. I became what he wanted, Mateo continued, until you. You made me want something different, something real. His eyes found hers, dark with memory. When you disappeared, I thought... He swallowed hard. I thought my uncle had been right all along. That love was weakness, that I didn't deserve anything pure. Mateo, Zoe whispered, but he shook his head. Let me finish. I need you to understand. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I never touched another woman after you left. Not once in 10 years. They all felt wrong, hollow copies of what we had. I threw myself into business instead, built an empire that would make you safe if you ever came back. But I never stopped looking for you, never stopped loving you. The raw honesty in his voice undid her completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks as years of guilt and longing crashed through her careful defenses. She'd spent so long convincing herself that leaving had been the only choice, that she'd saved their child from a violent world. But seeing Mateo now, sick and still fighting, loving and protective despite everything, made her question every decision. I'm so sorry, she choked out. I was so scared. When I found out about the baby and then the warning about the hit, I just ran. I didn't know who to trust. You could have trusted me. The words held no accusation, only old pain. I would have burned the world down to keep you safe. Both of you. Luca looked up at his mother's crying, but Mateo spoke to him softly in Italian, the language of his heritage flowing smooth and gentle. Their son nodded and returned to his toys, though he kept casting worried glances their way. The afternoon faded into evening, tension slowly easing as they shared simple meals and quiet conversations. Mateo told stories from his childhood. The good parts, the rare moments of joy before loss, shaped him into a weapon. Zoe found herself sharing memories of Luca's early years. Each milestone Mateo had missed an arrow to both their hearts. When night fell again, Luca curled up in his new bed while Zoe read him a story. Mateo listened from the doorway, his expression soft in a way that made her ache. After their son drifted off, they retreated to the main suite, the weight of revelations and regrets heavy between them. Mateo settled on the chaise, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Soon his breathing deepened into sleep, though it remained slightly labored. Zoe watched him for a long moment before retrieving a cashmere throw from the bed. She approached quietly, draping the blanket over his powerful frame. Her hand trembled as she brushed dark hair back from his forehead, remembering countless nights when she'd done the same thing in their shared past. His skin felt warm, almost feverish beneath her fingers. What she didn't notice was the slight change in his breathing, the way his lashes flickered against his cheeks. Mateo lay perfectly still under her gentle touch, but his eyes opened just enough to watch her through the shadows. The longing in his gaze was naked, unguarded, the look of a man facing both his greatest love and his approaching end, unwilling to waste a single moment of either. The morning sun had barely touched the windows when shouts erupted in the hallway. Zoe jolted awake, her heart racing as Mateo burst through the suite doors, Dante at his heels. Their faces were hard with tension. "Bring him in," Mateo ordered, his voice deadly quiet. 2 guards dragged in a familiar figure, the man from the photograph, the one who had helped her escape a decade ago. His face was bruised, but his eyes remained sharp, defiant. "You're supposed to be dead," Mateo growled, stepping closer. "I saw your body." "A necessary deception," the man replied calmly. "I learned your uncle wanted me silenced after I helped your wife escape. I had to disappear to survive, and to keep watching, gathering proof." Zoe's breath caught. Mateo's uncle? The man who had raised him? "My uncle?" Mateo's voice dropped even lower, dangerous. "Explain." He ordered the hit on Zoe when she got pregnant. He saw her as a threat to his control over you. I was supposed to carry out the order, but I couldn't. Not when I discovered she was carrying your child. He looked at Zoe. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything then. It wasn't safe." "Luca," Mateo said, understanding dawning. "He's targeting Luca now." "Yes, your uncle never stopped looking. He wants to eliminate any threat to his power, including your heir." That evening, dinner was a silent affair. Zoe watched Mateo's face, seeing the war between fury and illness in his features. Luca pushed food around his plate, sensing the tension. Later, his screams pierced the night. Zoe rushed to his bed, gathering him close as he sobbed about bad men coming to hurt them. She held him tightly, terror clawing at her throat as she realized time was running out. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the strategy room as Mateo swayed on his feet. His face went ashen, knuckles white against the mahogany table. Before anyone could react, his legs buckled and he crumpled to the floor. Zoe rushed to his side, her heart pounding as she helped guards carry him to the master suite. With gentle hands, she eased him onto the silk sheets, dabbing his forehead with the EIE cool cloth. His skin burned with fever, but his fingers found hers, squeezing weakly. "Stay," he whispered, dark eyes fixed on her face. The word held years of longing. Before she could respond, alarm sirens pierced the air. Shouts and gunfire erupted from the eastern side of the estate. Zoe's blood turned to ice as heavy boots thundered down the corridor. The door burst open. Armed men in black tactical gear stormed in, dragging the bloodied nanny with them. Zoe clutched Luca close, but rough hands tore them apart. Her screams echoed as they were dragged away, leaving Matteo unconscious on the bed. When Matteo finally stirred, his head throbbing, the suite was empty. On his desk lay photographs, surveillance shots of Zoe meeting with the supposedly dead man, alongside messages discussing plans to infiltrate his organization. His heart shattered, piece by piece. Then he saw it. Luca's favorite red toy car on the floor, smeared with fresh blood. The truth hit him like a punch. This was a setup. They had taken his family to draw him out. Fighting waves of dizziness, Matteo pushed himself upright. His body was failing, but determination blazed in his eyes. "I'm coming for you," he growled through clenched teeth. "Even if it kills me, I'm bringing you home." Matteo's hands shook as he spread surveillance photos across his office desk, but his voice remained steel as he worked the phones through the night. Every crime family in New York owed him favors. Now it was time to collect. "I want eyes on that warehouse in 20 minutes, he ordered, ignoring the stabbing pain in his chest. The poison his uncle had been slipping him for weeks still coursed through his veins. But rage kept him standing. Intelligence filtered in steadily. The warehouse sat isolated on the waterfront, owned by a shell company linked to his family. Guards patrolled the perimeter with military precision. By dawn, Matteo had assembled 30 of his most loyal soldiers in the courtyard. Despite Dante's protests, he strapped on a bulletproof vest. "You're too weak to fight," Dante warned. "They have my son," Matteo growled. "I'm going." Inside the warehouse, Zoe held Luca close in their concrete cell. The boy trembled but hadn't cried once. "Your papa is coming for us," she whispered, smoothing his dark hair. "He'll never stop until he finds us." The heavy door creaked open. Matteo's uncle stepped in, impeccably dressed despite the hour. His smile dripped poison. "Such a touching scene," he mocked. You know, poisoning Matteo was almost too easy. He trusted family completely. He adjusted his silk tie. "Once he's dead, the empire falls to me, as it always should have." Zoe's retort died in her throat as explosions rocked the building. Gunfire erupted outside. Through the tiny window, she glimpsed black SUVs surrounding the warehouse. "He's here," she breathed, clutching Luca tighter. "It's almost over, baby. Papa's coming." More detonations thundered, closer now. Zoe kissed Luca's forehead, whispering prayers of protection as war raged around them. Gunfire lit up the warehouse interior as Matteo advanced with deadly focus. His breaths came in sharp bursts, each step a battle against the poison weakening his muscles. Around him, his men systematically cleared each room, while Dante coordinated the perimeter assault through his earpiece. Blood splattered the concrete as Matteo cut through guard after guard. His vision blurred, but determination drove him forward. He could hear Luca's cries echoing down the corridor. When he reached the holding room, his uncle was dragging Luca toward a rear exit. Zoe fought against 2 guards restraining her. Something primal snapped inside Matteo. He launched himself at his uncle, ripping Luca away and shoving the boy toward Zoe. The 2 men collided in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Matteo's legs buckled twice, but he kept rising, blocking strikes and landing devastating blows. His uncle's smirk turned to terror as Matteo's hands locked around his throat. The snap was audible. Zoe ran to Matteo as he swayed on his feet. She caught him before he fell, Luca wrapping small arms around both parents. Together they staggered to the waiting SUV. Inside, Matteo drifted between consciousness and darkness while Zoe pressed close. "Stay with me," she pleaded softly. "We'll get through this together. I promise." The estate's medical wing buzzed with activity as doctors rushed to analyze Matteo's latest test results. When the lead physician entered the private room where Zoe held Matteo's hand, his face broke into an unexpected smile. The diagnosis stunned them all. Systematic poisoning, not terminal illness, had caused the symptoms. With the source eliminated, Matteo's body could heal. Days melted together as color returned to Matteo's cheeks. Zoe and Luca became fixtures at his bedside, sharing meals and stories. Luca's laughter filled the sterile room with warmth, while Zoe's gentle touch anchored Matteo to life itself. One evening, after they finished dinner in their suite, Matteo took Zoe's hand. He led her to the balcony where city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds. His voice grew soft as he confessed how losing her had shattered him. Now, with a second chance, he vowed to prove himself worthy of her love every day. Dropping to one knee, Matteo offered not an order but his heart. Tears spilled down Zoe's cheeks as she whispered yes. Luca raced out to join their embrace. Together they watched festival fireworks paint the sky, their small family whole at last. "You're mine forever, Zoe," Matteo murmured, "and I'm yours." Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.